It was 6:42 in the morning, the kind of gray, damp Tuesday where even the air feels undecided, and three members of the Ridgeview Estates HOA were standing behind their pristine white vinyl fence. Yeah, the kind that all matches like it came out of the same catalog, staring through a chain-link barrier at something they had spent the last year mocking like it was a punchline. Except this time, nobody was laughing, because the old factory behind their neighborhood, the one they called the eyesore, had come back to life overnight, and not quietly either. First it was the sound. Low, diesel, steady. Not loud enough to complain about yet, just enough to feel in your chest. Then came the lights, bright white industrial LEDs flooding through broken window frames that hadn't seen electricity in nearly a decade. And then trucks, two service rigs, a flatbed hauling steel beams, and a forklift creeping through the side bay like it belonged there. Like it had always belonged there. Like it had just been waiting for permission. Except here's the thing. Nobody in that neighborhood gave permission. I was already inside when they showed up, standing near the main bay with a contractor reviewing measurements, coffee in one hand, paperwork in the other, and I saw them before they saw me. Three silhouettes frozen behind that fence like they'd just watched a ghost clock in for a shift. And then she arrived. Not rushing, not panicking. No, that wasn't her style. She pulled up slow in a dark SUV, stepped out in heels that had never touched dirt a day in their life, holding a leather folder like it was a weapon. This was Melissa Grant, HOA president, the kind of woman who smiles like she's already decided how your story ends. She didn't wave, didn't ask. She walked straight to the fence and just stood there, scanning everything like she was looking for something illegal she could point at, something she could shut down. But instead, what she saw were county permit tags zip-tied to the gate, licensed contractors, safety markings already painted, and me, standing right in the middle of it. Not hiding, not rushing, not asking. That was the moment it hit them. This wasn't renovation, this was activation. And here's the part nobody likes to admit. They thought that building was dead because they needed it to be, because as long as it stayed empty, it stayed harmless. It stayed something they could complain about without consequences. But the second it started working again, it became something they couldn't control. Now, if you had been standing there with me, watching that realization hit all three of them at once, what would you have done? Would you shut it down, negotiate, or just keep building like nothing else mattered? Drop it in the comments. I'm curious where you land on that. Because me? I didn't hesitate, and that's because I didn't buy that place by accident. I'd spent 11 years building and maintaining diesel fleets for companies that made more money in a month than I saw in a year. Fixing breakdowns at midnight, keeping trucks moving through storms, harvest seasons, deadlines that didn't care about weather or weekends. And after a while you start noticing something. You're the one holding the system together, but you don't own a single piece of it. That changes how you think. So when I found that factory, sitting right behind one of the most polished, HOA-controlled neighborhoods in the county, I didn't see decay. I saw infrastructure, reinforced concrete, oversized bays, industrial power history, access routes wide enough for heavy trucks, and most importantly, separation. There was a fence, a drainage strip, and an old service road that had been there longer than half those houses. Translation? That property wasn't theirs. But they acted like it was. See, Ridgeview Estates wasn't just neat, it was controlled. Every mailbox identical. Every lawn trimmed like it was being judged. Every rule enforced with that quiet, smiling pressure that makes you feel like you're doing something wrong even when you're not. And people like Melissa? They don't just enforce rules, they enforce expectations. So when I closed on that factory, I already knew I wasn't just buying a building. I was buying friction. And sure enough, 3 days later, I met the welcoming committee. They were waiting at the gate when I pulled up with a locksmith and a roofing crew. Melissa front and center, two board members behind her like backup singers, and she gave me that same smile, the one that looks polite until you realize it's not asking, it's measuring. Are you planning to address the visual condition before beginning any serious work? She asked, holding that folder against her chest like it contained authority. Now, that's a carefully built sentence. Sounds reasonable, but what it really means is, how far can we push you before you push back? I leaned on the truck door, looked past her at the building, then back at her. I'm planning to secure the structure and follow county regulations, I said, calm, simple, no extras. Her smile tightened just a little. Well, residents here have concerns, she continued, voice smooth, controlled, about noise, traffic, and industrial activity returning to the area. That last part, she stretched it just enough to make it sound like a problem that hadn't happened yet, which told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about what I was doing. It was about what they were afraid I might do. And fear? That's where people start making mistakes. Over the next couple weeks, the letters started showing up: formal tone, HOA letterhead, carefully worded warnings about potential nuisance, property value concerns, access questions, nothing directly enforceable, but just enough to create pressure. And here's the thing, most people react to that. They argue, they defend, they get emotional. I didn't. I documented. Every letter went into a binder. Every conversation logged with date and time. When one of the board members parked outside the gate taking photos, I saved the footage. When someone tried to block the service road with cones one morning, I removed them, took pictures, and sent them to the county access office before lunch. Because I wasn't just building a garage, I was building a case. And the more they pushed, the more they handed me exactly what I needed. See, people like Melissa make one critical mistake. They think confidence equals control, and once they believe they can influence the outcome, they start acting before they actually have authority. They start reaching, guessing, assuming. And assumptions? That's where things break. By the end of week 3, they weren't just concerned neighbors anymore. They were actively trying to slow the project down. Calls to zoning, early noise complaints before a single impact wrench had even fired, questions about fuel storage that didn't exist yet. All of it designed to create friction, delay cost. But what they didn't realize was simple. I had already planned for resistance. And the more aggressively they moved, the more evidence they created. And that's when things started shifting, quietly at first, then all at once. Because there's a difference between owning a property and understanding it. And I was about to find out just how much they had overlooked. All right, let me pause the story for a second, because this right here, this exact moment, is where most people lose without even realizing it. Not because they're wrong, but because they don't understand the game they're actually playing. According to standard procedure, HOAs feel powerful because inside their boundaries, they usually are, they control aesthetics, noise guidelines, even what color your mailbox can be. But, and this is where it gets interesting, that authority stops at the property line, not the imaginary one they think exists, the legal one. From a legal perspective, what Melissa and her board were trying to do is incredibly common. They were attempting to treat my property like it was subject to their governing documents, except it wasn't. And once you step outside HOA jurisdiction, their influence shifts from enforcement to persuasion and sometimes intimidation. Now here's the part people miss. This is a psychological trap. When someone presents themselves with enough confidence, paperwork, and tone, your brain starts assuming they must have authority, even when they don't. And if you react emotionally, you end up playing defense in a game where you were never actually under attack. The lesson here is simple. Control isn't about who speaks the loudest. It's about who understands the rules before the conversation even starts. And at this point in the story, only one side had actually read them. So once I had those records in my hands, everything changed, not overnight, not dramatically, but internally. And that's what mattered most. Because when you know the ground you're standing on is solid, pressure stops feeling like danger. It starts feeling like noise. I remember walking out of that county records office with a stack of documents thick enough to shut down every argument they hadn't even made yet. Parcel history, utility designations, access easements, prior industrial use classification. All of it stamped, archived, and very real, and I sat in my truck for a minute just flipping through pages, not rushing, just letting it settle in. They thought this place was dead. It wasn't. It had just been quiet. And legally speaking, quiet is not the same thing as gone. So I stopped treating the building like a renovation project and started running it like a launch. That shift, that's where momentum comes from. The next 10 days were surgical. No wasted motion, no guesswork, no shortcuts that could come back and bite me later. Because at this point, I wasn't just building something functional. I was building something defensible. We started with the office wing, stripped out everything rotten, moldy drywall, broken partitions, old wiring that looked like it had been installed during a different decade, and maybe it had. Cleaned it down to structure, rebuilt only what was necessary, nothing decorative, nothing that didn't serve a purpose. Then we moved to the main floor. Old machine anchors got cut flush with the concrete. Cracks were patched and sealed, Years of oil stains cleaned out until the surface actually reflected light again. And then came the lighting. Rows of LED bay fixtures installed high and bright, the kind that doesn't hide anything, no shadows, no corners, because I didn't want anything about that place to feel questionable. Visibility is a weapon when you're doing everything right. By the end of week 1, you could walk through that building and feel the difference. It didn't feel abandoned anymore. It felt claimed. And outside, that's where things got louder. Not chaotic loud, not reckless, but intentional. Gravel trucks came in and dressed the side lot so it could handle weight. Fresh striping marked equipment lanes, parking zones, turnaround paths. A legal signboard went up right near the fence line. Business name, permit numbers, contractor licenses, all in plain view. No hiding, no ambiguity. I wanted them to see it. Not just the work, but the compliance. Because here's the truth. When people are looking for something to shut down, what frustrates them most is when there's nothing to grab onto. And that's exactly what started happening. Melissa drove by twice the first day, slow passes, windows up, that same expression like she was trying to spot a crack in the system. The next day, 3 times. One of her board members stood near the fence pretending to be on a call, but his eyes never left the bay doors. Another one actually took photos of the signboard like he expected the lettering itself to violate something. But there was nothing. No missing permits. No blocked access. No unsafe conditions. Just progress. And then, the sound changed everything. You don't realize how powerful sound is until it starts telling a story people didn't want to hear. Impact guns snapping loose bolts, compressed air hissing through lines, the steady idle of diesel engines rolling in and out. Not chaos. No. Rhythm. Work has a rhythm. And once that rhythm starts, it's hard to pretend nothing is happening. By the second week, the lifts were installed. 2 heavy-duty truck lifts bolted into the floor, tested, certified. A fabrication corner framed out near the back wall, welding equipment set up, ventilation in place, compressed air lines running overhead like arteries, feeding every station. This wasn't a maybe anymore. This was operational. And that's when the energy shifted on their side, from confidence to urgency. Because see, it's one thing to stop a plan. It's another thing to stop something that's already moving. Melissa didn't come to the fence anymore. She sent things. Certified letters, formal notices, more polished language, each one trying a different angle. Noise concerns, traffic speculation, community character impact. That phrase came up a lot. Like if you say it enough times, it turns into authority. It doesn't. But it sounds like it might. And that's all they needed to keep pushing. Then came the escalation. Monday morning, 8:17 a.m. I remember the time because I was standing right by the front bay when the courier pulled up. Clean envelope, signature required. I already knew what it was before I opened it. Cease and desist. Big words, heavy tone, claims that my operation posed an immediate threat to residential peace, exceeded acceptable use, demanded halt pending emergency review, the kind of document designed to stop you before you even verify if it has teeth. And that's the trick. Because most people, they freeze right there. They pause construction, call lawyers, start second-guessing everything they've done. But I didn't stop, because I had already checked. And I knew something they didn't. The county had already seen everything. Inspections had passed. Permits were active. Use classification was documented. And more importantly, every complaint they filed had already been reviewed and quietly dismissed. But the neighborhood didn't know that. By noon, word had spread, fast, faster than facts ever do, that the county was finally stepping in, that the garage was going to be shut down, that enforcement was coming. And I'll be honest, you could feel the tension shift. Contractors asked questions. A couple of them looked at me like they were wondering if they were about to get caught in something messy, and I just told them the same thing I'd been telling myself from the beginning. Keep working. Because momentum matters. And stopping, even for the wrong reason, can cost you more than pushing through. 2 days later, I walked into that county review meeting. Not rushed, not defensive, just prepared. Folder in hand. Thick, organized, everything tabbed. Permits, inspection sign-offs, parcel maps, access easements, utility confirmations, prior use documentation, not guesses, not interpretations, records. And across that table, Melissa. Same posture, same polished look, but there was something different now. Not weaker, but sharper, like she knew this was the moment that decided everything. She had an attorney with her this time, two board members sitting stiff beside her, and that folder she always carried? It was thicker too, which meant one thing. They had committed. The meeting started simple. County planner first, then zoning, then fire compliance. Each department walking through the complaints, one by one. And here's where things started unraveling. Access concerns? The planner said, flipping through documents. Recorded easement confirms legal use of service road. No obstruction permitted. Just like that, gone. Zoning classification? Zoning officer continued. Property retains industrial use status under prior designation. Activity consistent with permitted operations. Another one gone. Safety compliance? Fire inspector added. Upgrades completed, systems inspected, no violations. Gone. You could feel it. Not dramatic, not loud. Just a slow, steady shift in the room. Like air leaking out of something that had been inflated too far. Melissa tried to redirect. The issue isn't just technical compliance, she said, voice still controlled but tighter now. It's compatibility with the surrounding residential environment. And there it was. Not law. Preference. And the planner didn't even hesitate. Community preference, he said, calm, measured, does not override legally established use of a separately governed parcel. That sentence, that was it. No raised voices. No argument. Just, final. The attorney leaned back. Board members went quiet. Melissa didn't respond right away, just nodded once, slow, like she understood exactly what had just happened. Because this wasn't a debate anymore. It was a conclusion. By the time the meeting ended, the emergency request had been denied. The cease and desist held no enforceable authority, and everything I had built, every decision, every step, was now backed publicly, off. Officially, on record. And here's the part that matters most. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like confirmation. Because I hadn't fought them with force. I had outlasted them with structure. 3 months later, that building didn't look abandoned, controversial, or temporary anymore. It looked busy. Diesel pickups lined the side lot before sunrise, fleet contracts coming in weekly, owner-operators rolling through for diagnostics, injectors, brake work, wiring repairs. The bays stayed full, lights stayed on, doors kept opening. And the fence? Still there. Exactly where it had always been. On one side, a neighborhood that once thought it could decide what existed beyond its borders. On the other, something they couldn't stop, couldn't vote against, couldn't quietly pressure into disappearing. And every time another truck rolled through those gates, that difference got a little louder. So here's where everything settles. Not in the noise, not in the arguments, not even in that meeting room where it all technically ended, but in what sticks after the dust clears. Because stories like this, they're not really about a building, or an HOA, or even a conflict. They're about how people react when control slips out of their hands. And if you zoom out for a second, really look at it. This whole situation was never just about noise, or property values, or community character. Those were just the words they used. The real driver underneath all of it? Loss of control. Because for years, that empty factory was safe to them. Not physically, but psychologically. It was predictable. It wasn't changing. It wasn't doing anything they didn't approve of. And the moment that changed, when it became active, productive, independent, it disrupted that illusion. And people don't fight disruption. They fight what it represents. This is a psychological trap a lot of people fall into. When you're used to having influence over your environment, you start believing that influence extends further than it actually does. And when reality pushes back, instead of adjusting, you escalate. You double down. You convince yourself that if you apply enough pressure, things will go back to the way they were. But they don't. Because reality doesn't negotiate with expectations. Now, from a legal perspective, this is where the lesson gets practical, because what saved me in that situation wasn't luck, and it wasn't aggression, it was clarity. I knew what the property was, what it wasn't, and most importantly, what governed it. And that's something most people skip. They buy based on appearance, location, assumptions, and they never dig into the actual classification, the history, the recorded rights, the boring stuff. The stuff that doesn't look impressive until the moment it matters more than anything else. According to standard procedure, jurisdictions matter, boundaries matter, and documentation beats opinion every single time. No matter how confident the opinion sounds, no matter how many people repeat it. And here's the part that might hit a little different. Melissa wasn't stupid. She wasn't reckless. She was operating on a system that usually works. Because most of the time, people don't push back. Most of the time, pressure is enough. A letter is enough. A warning is enough. And if I had reacted emotionally, if I had argued or hesitated or tried to negotiate peace before understanding the structure, I probably would have given them exactly what they needed: uncertainty. And uncertainty? That's leverage. But instead, I stayed quiet. I documented. I verified, and I built. Not fast, intentional. Not flashy, defensible. And that's the part nobody talks about enough. Winning doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like patience applied in the right direction. The lesson here is simple, but it's not easy. If you're stepping into any situation where someone else believes they have authority over you, whether it's an HOA, a company, a person, whatever, you need to ask one question before anything else. Do they actually have it? Not emotionally, not socially, not based on tone or confidence. Legally, structurally, documented. Because if the answer is no, then everything they're doing is strategy, not power. And strategies? They can fail. Now, I'm not saying every HOA is wrong, or every conflict ends like this. Sometimes they do have authority. Sometimes the rules are enforceable. Sometimes you are the one out of line. And that's where this gets real, because the only way to know the difference is to do the work most people avoid. Read, verify, understand. Because once you do that, something shifts. Pressure stops feeling intimidating and starts feeling predictable. And predictable things? You can plan around those. You can outlast those. You can even use those. And that's exactly what happened here. I didn't set out to prove a point. I didn't buy that factory thinking, I'm going to fight an HOA. I bought it because it made sense, structurally, financially, logistically. The conflict just revealed something that was already true. That property had value, with or without their approval. And that's the part one want you to sit with for a second. How many things in your life have value that you're letting someone else define? How many opportunities get labeled as bad ideas just because they don't fit someone else's expectations? How often do people confuse familiarity with correctness? Because if there's one thing this whole experience made clear, it's this. Just because something looks out of place doesn't mean it doesn't belong. Sometimes it just means it hasn't been understood yet. And yeah, every morning now, those trucks roll in, engines humming, tools firing up, work getting done, and on the other side of that fence, life in Ridgeview keeps going. Lawns trimmed, mailboxes aligned, everything still neat, still controlled. Except for one thing, the view. And maybe that's the real ending here. Not that anyone won or lost, but that something outside their control kept moving anyway. So now I'm curious, if you were in that position, would you have pushed back like I did? Or would you have played it safe and walked away? Drop your take below. I read more of those than you think. And if you want more stories like this, real situations, real pressure, real outcomes, go ahead and subscribe. Because sometimes the most interesting fights are the ones nobody thought they could lose.